Good morning. Today we're going to continue with learning about Maaser, giving a tenth of your income to worthy causes. And I will tell you a few stories that highlight the importance of it, and we're going to finish learning the halachot. At the end of the class, if you have questions on other topics, we'll take time for that as well. Okay, now I would like to start with a story. Last time I told you a story about Rabbi Yuhanan ben Zakkai and his nephews, how he saw a dream on Rosh Hashanah, and he realized that since his nephews are supposed to lose money, it's better if they lose this money towards tzedakah as opposed to towards tax collectors. And today I'll tell you another story. This story is about a tzedakah collector for yeshiva who used to visit a certain businessman once a year. And as usual, this time he calls him and asks him if he can meet him. The businessman says, "Yes, Rabbi, but I'm telling you right away, the business hasn't been going well, and there's no way I'm giving you the same as every year." So the rabbi says, "No problem, whatever you give is good." He came to him, and they met, and after the meeting he gave him a check. So, being a nice person, he didn't open the check in front of the businessman. He came out first, and then he opened it, and he sees it's for $3,000. He says, "Doesn't make sense. Usually he gives me 1,000. Probably he made a mistake. He probably wanted to give me 300, and by mistake he wrote 3,000. So he's thinking, should I go back or not? So he was thinking and thinking until he got home. When he got home, he called him and he said, "My friend, you gave me a check, and I noticed that you wrote it for $3,000. Is that correct?" He says, "Yes, Rabbi, that's correct." He says, "But didn't you tell me on the phone that your business is not doing well and there is no way you're giving me the same amount as every year?" He says, "Yes, Rabbi, what I meant is that I noticed that the more tzedakah I give, the more I earn. And as I noticed that my business is not doing well, I realized that I'm not giving enough tzedakah. And therefore I told you, there is no way I'm giving you the same. So I gave you more." And this businessman understood that a person is a manager of God's account. Hashem gives him money. Part of the money is for him and his family, and the rest is to distribute to poor people and those in need. If he does the job well, then Hashem will give him another installment, and it will give him more money to manage. And if he does the job poorly, then Hashem will say, "I'll find another manager. I sent this money for the poor people, and it didn't get to them. So then Hashem will take away the money from this person and find a different person as his manager." The Maaser is 10%. Most people separate Maaser after they earn the money. Some people, however, knowing this secret, they say, "Hashem, I'm going to separate Maaser now, and this way you have to give me the 90%. And some people actually behave like this throughout their business career. Before they would enter a business meeting, they would calculate how much do I stand to gain from this deal. Let's say $1 million. So right away they would write a check, $100,000 to a yeshiva, to an organization, and they would already prepare it. And with that, they would go into the business meeting. And they would say, "Hashem, please be my partner. I would like to give this money to charity. I don't have it yet. let me earn this money, and the money will automatically go to charity. And when you make Hashem your partner, then you're for sure going to succeed.
You're not actually giving it, you're just telling Hashem to give it.
You're ready. Yes, you're ready. You prepared it. And if you have the money in the bank, then even better. You can actually give it.
And you don't have to give it again later, right? Because
You don't have to give it away, give it later because you already gave it, right? And there's actually a story about one great philanthropist who met with again a person who raises money for yeshiva, and he gave him a check. And a few minutes later, while that man was still in his office, a phone rang, and it was his broker, and he said that his stocks just went up, and they calculated it was almost exactly 10 times more than what he gave. But they noticed there was slightly more. He gained slightly more than 10 times what he gave. He says, how can it be? I gave you this amount and I earned a little more. And his wife came in and she said, oh, by the way, somebody came to knocked on the door and, to collect tzedakah. I gave him $250. And then they figured out that extra $2,500 gain was from what his wife gave. So that's another way of operating, that you give tzedakah or you sign up. You know, sometimes organizations ask you to commit monthly donation. So you commit to this organization, that organization, that organization, so it comes to a certain amount. You didn't earn that amount yet, but you already committed for the whole year. But this way you are guaranteeing that you will have that income. Now, we gave a few examples of what is considered income that you have to separate 10% and what is not. So I would like to give you some additional examples. What if you have rental income? You have your own house that you live in, and you have a few properties that you rent out. Do you have to separate Maaser from the rent that people pay you? So, yes, rental income is income. Of course, you have to subtract all the business expenses, and whatever money is left afterwards, you separate 10%. However, what if you yourself, and that happens, I know some people like that, they themselves rent out their house and instead they live in an apartment? Because they say, why should I live in such a big house? It's not worth it. I would rather rent it to others for much more, and for my small family, it's enough a small apartment. So in such a case, you living in an apartment becomes a business expense. Because if you didn't have to rent out your house, you would just live in your house. You wouldn't have this expense. So the rent that you pay in an apartment, you can subtract from the rent that you get from your house. And that makes sense.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So, like, if you have a house and you're renting it out, it's your house, and then you're renting some, wouldn't you subtract your mortgage payment?
You would subtract your mortgage
payment?
as well, whatever expenses you have.
Both of them?
Why not? The mortgage payment is an expense as well. In order to have this business running, you have to make monthly payments.
But then, aren't you supposed to be living somewhere? So both of them.
Well, where are you living in your story?
In an apartment.
Yes, so if you would be living in your own house, so then you wouldn't have the income. Because you want to use it as your business, now you're forced to rent elsewhere. So that becomes your expense. But which part of your mortgage is considered the business expense? Only the interest part of it, because the principal is your savings account. Whatever the house costs and you're paying for it, that's going to stay as equity, and then when you sell the house, it's going to go to your pocket, right? So you're just putting the money into the value of the house. So you're not spending it. If the market goes down, chas v'shalom, and then the price goes down, then you can subtract it from your income. But while you're paying mortgage, the principal is not deductible, but the interest is.
If I don't understand anything, do I have to worry right now? Because I don't know why anything.
If certain things don't apply to you, then you don't have to worry about it.
I'm saying for the future, like
Yes.
it comes to you later.
Yes.
Financial literacy is important. You will learn. It's going to be okay.
Okay.
You have a husband that will take care of all of it for you.
Yes. One more example. We said that babysitting that you need only because you're going to work is deductible. Babysitting that you're just doing for your own convenience or for the child's needs, that is not deductible. And similarly with domestic help, if you need to hire a cleaning lady, if you didn't have to go to work, you wouldn't need to hire a cleaning lady. You would do everything yourself. But because you're working and you're busy and you need to be at your job, now you need help in the house, and because of that you're hiring a cleaning lady or nanny, that is considered a business expense.
How about daycare? It's not school.
Same idea. Daycare, if you would keep your children at home if you were home, then it is a business expense. The only reason why you're sending them to daycare is because you need to be at work. But if you would send them to daycare anyway, even if you were home, then it's not a business expense because you would have done it anyway for yourself. If your business requires or your job requires you to take a seminar, to take a course, to travel, to increase your knowledge, all that is considered part of the business expense. And at the end of the month, you can subtract those costs from your income.
And what if you're going like an extra mile for work? Like it's something like you don't have to go to the seminar, but you're going to. And it's going to help with work, but it's definitely not necessary. Then,
Still, why not?
so,
Yes,
I don't know, just-
yes. Anything you do for business, right, that is a business expense.
So for seminars you mentioned, so at my work, for example, you pay, but at the end of the year they reimburse you.
Yes, if they reimburse you, then yes. Now, one more question. What about taxes that you pay, but they will be returned to you when you retire?
So you're supposed to give
But then when you're gonna get your check, you're gonna then take 10% from it, no?
Right now, you're taking 10% off from what you get, but your job also deducts for whatever it is,
The 401k stuff.
401k.
Taxed money that goes to retirement.
Yes, and then eventually you're going to get that money.
Yeah.
So then when you-
And it's going to be
like
taxed
Social Security or whatever else.
yeah. After when you use it, no?
Like Social Security.
It's like Social Security.
Pension, all that.
Yes, pension and other things like that. So these things, even though they are on your account and eventually you're going to get them, you don't have to pay Maaser on them until you get it. Later, when you retire, if you choose to take it out earlier, then whatever net amount you get, you would separate 10% from that.
So if someone's on Social Security, that's income, they still need to do Maaser?
Yes, Social Security is income. Yes.
I have a question. I'm sorry. I think you mentioned in the last class, but in terms of like health insurance, like for example, I buy my own health insurance. It's a business expense.
So you
If I didn't work, I'll get Medicaid. So
yes. So then, if that's true, that you could get a cheaper or free insurance if you didn't have to work, then you can count it as business expense.
okay.
But if, let's say, you would say, no, I don't want to rely on that, or I want this specific company, this specific provider, this specific doctor, and I would pay it anyway even if I didn't work, so then it's not a business expense.
So you said she has
insurance if she didn't work or whatever?
If you would
Yeah.
have the same insurance even if you didn't work, then
It's not a business.
it's not a business
So
expense.
because she's working, she's paying her own insurance.
If the only reason why you're getting this insurance is because you're working and that's what you have to get, then it is. For example, if you earn more and because of that you say, you know what, now that I'm earning more, I can afford better, so that's your own personal expense, not something that your job requires. And what about you had an accident, chas v'shalom, and then the insurance company is paying you, and they're paying you more than the damage. So then, whatever is more than the damage is income. You're getting this money. You subtract whatever it costs to fix the car, but whatever is left is income now.
So let's say you got a bump, and then instead of going like insurance says it's going to cost $100 to fix, but you find a guy who could do it for $80, then $20 is income. What if you would have gone to the 100 person, the person who did 100, but then you were like, I need money, I need to save it or whatever? That's not like that's still income.
Yeah,
Well, then I
that's
guess you could have to answer.
right. That's the income. Now, there's a famous rabbi who passed away recently. His name is Rabbi Chaim Pinchas Scheinberg, and people often ask him questions on any topic you can think of, and he was known as a lenient opinion. However, the only area in law that he was strict was Maaser. And that is because he said, if I make a mistake and I tell people to pay more than they really have to, then if they give more charity, they're going to get it back. Hashem's going to pay them back. But if I make the mistake the other way and I tell them to give too little, and they end up giving less than they're supposed to, then they're going to lose the money because it's not theirs, and they're not going to get the mitzvah. So in Maaser, he said, if you have any doubt, you always go on a strict side, because that's a safer side, whichever way you go. Because again, you realize that whatever you're supposed to get, you're going to get. And if you share with others, Hashem's going to give you another portion. And Rabbi Moshe Feinstein, he used to say that people ask him all kinds of questions, but they often forget to ask him about raising children and about Maaser. People think it's simple. The child is growing, I'll figure out how to raise him. And the same thing, Maaser, what can be easier? Just whatever you earn 10%, and I'll figure out myself what I have to and what not. So he said this is a halacha question, whether it is raising children or giving Maaser, as any other area of life. Now, what does Shulchan Aruch require us to give? We said that we separate Maaser as minhag, as a custom. And within this custom there are various levels. The Shulchan Aruch says that a person who cannot afford it, all he has to do is give tzedakah about a cent a day, or about $3 to $5 a year. He fulfills his requirement. If he is able, the average is 10%. Average person should give 10%. If he gives less than 10%, he's considered, if he can afford. If he can afford it and he gives less than 10%, he's considered stingy. If he gives 10%, he's considered average. If he gives more than 10%, he's considered generous. However, he says that a person who does not depend on his check month to month, which means he is comfortable. He has a running business, he has a few sources of income, or his emunah is good enough that he is not worried. He says the ideal for a person who can afford it is to give 20%. We mentioned that this is what Yaakov Avinu promised Hashem. He said, "V'chol asher titen li aser asrenu lach," whatever you give me, I will separate 10%, and I'll separate 10% again, and that's together 20%. And also we see in prophets, there is actually a promise that whoever separates Maaser, and some say that refers to 20%, he will see unlimited blessing. So for an average person, you can expect that if you separate 10%, you will get much more than you gave away. And many people have testified, and I can testify to this myself, that whenever you give Maaser, it comes back. It comes back in greater quantity. And whenever you feel, now I cannot afford it, and you start diminishing, then for a prolonged period of time you have to live barely making it. And once you start increasing it, then you have more.
How can you start increasing it if you can't afford it?
Often it is just in your mind. Often you are scared and you feel, how can I? What's going to be? I have to save for, how do you say in English, na черный день, for a rainy day. And if you have that worry, you feel you cannot afford it.
What if it's like something that I'm really trying to save up for?
Same thing. If right now Hashem sends you an opportunity to help somebody who needs it more than you might need it in the future, so then your responsibility is to say, I see a sign from Hashem that this person is the one that deserves this money.
What if you're in a position, so like right now I live at home and I'm making my income and I'm not paying bills, but that's because my parents are just really nice. They're not asking me to pay bills because they want me to save.
That's a good question. What if a person lives at home and they work, they're single, they live at home? Do they have to separate Maaser? So here, the proper thing would be for a child that lives at home, or anybody who lives and benefits from others, is to share in the expenses. If the parents need your help, it would make it easier for them. Then, of course, you have to share in the expenses. If they, however, let you keep your money, then it's your income, and you would have to separate Maaser from it. But again, keep in mind that instead of just keeping it all for yourself, you should pay for your share of expenses for your parents.
Yes, I was going to ask, so if I'm going to give Maaser, let's say to some company, and like my parents, let's say, I don't know how they're doing Maaser or whatever, but like, do I first have to offer them my 10% before I offer? I guess we're going to talk about.
Yeah, we're going to talk about who gets your charity first. However, I just want to say another story before we go into that. There's a famous story about Nagdimon ben Gurion in the Gemara. It says that he was one of the richest people in Israel, in Yerushalayim, at the time of the destruction of the temple. And eventually, he lost his money, and his children became so poor that one time the rabbis met his daughter, and she was searching in a garbage dump for grains that went through the digestive system of animals that she could eat. And they asked her, "Whose daughter are you?" And she told them, "I'm the daughter of Nagdimon ben Gurion." And they were, of course, shocked, but they understood why it happened. They said Hashem punished him for not giving charity according to his level. And now, if you know what kind of person he was, you would be surprised by the statement. What do you mean he didn't give enough charity? The Talmud says that whenever he would leave his house to go to synagogue, to go to his business, servants would go in front of him and they would unroll new carpets. He would walk on them, and afterwards they were free for all to take. And the poor people would go and take these carpets, and that's how they would earn a living. That's just one way he would help the poor, which means imagine how many miles he walked every day. And everywhere he walked, carpets and silk were spread under him, and afterwards it became property of the poor people. And Talmud speaks about other ways that he helped the poor. However, the Chachamim say he had so much wealth that more was expected from him. And because he did not do according to his stature, it was considered that he didn't fulfill his obligation. And because of that, his wealth was taken away from him. So among the Jewish people, there is such a concept of 90% club. And these are Jewish businessmen who give 90% of their earnings to charity. And they live on the remaining 10%. And really, this is something that many more can achieve and afford. Because we say that whenever your income increases, your lifestyle becomes more and more fancy. Your dreams become greater, and your hunger for money becomes even greater. What if a person at the beginning of his career would define what lifestyle would be ideal for him and his family? And he would write it down and stick to it. And as they get more and more wealthy, they would not raise that level. Then eventually they're going to reach a point that their income is going to be so much greater, and that means whatever they earn more than their preset lifestyle can safely go to tzedakah. For example, let's say you say to yourself, between you and your husband and your children, you all get together and you decide, you know what, with our current lifestyle, if we just raise it a little bit to be able to afford whatever we need, let's say whatever the figure is now in New York, let's say 200,000. If we have that amount a year, we're going to be happy. What if we earn $1 million? Does it mean that now let's all of a sudden move to a different neighborhood, buy a better house, buy a better car? That's what usually happens. Or no, we decided that 200,000 is enough for us. That means if I earn $1 million, the extra 800,000 I don't need. So I can give it out. What usually happens is that people raise their living standard, and to support it, they say, now I have to reinvest whatever extra money I have to earn even more to match the people that now I live among and I hang out with. And now I have to afford better vacations and better cars and everything else must be better. And as I spoke to one person, he said, this is how Yetzer Hara tricks him. He said, Rabbi, right now, if I give tzedakah, I'll give 100,000 a year. But if I don't give this 100,000, if I invest it together with the rest of my money, in a few years from now, I'll be able to give $1 million a year. And if I don't give that $1 million and I wait another 5-10 years, I'll be able to give $10 million every year. Isn't it better that I should wait 10-15 years and not give Maaser so that I can give much more? If I continue giving 100,000 now, every year, that's what I'm going to stay with. Right. Right. We don't know the future. Right. And that's what I told him, that I know personally many people who were multi-millionaires or billionaires for some short period of time and some for a long period of time, but eventually all of them lost their money. And I know one person in particular, he lost probably 99% of his wealth. And instead of a billionaire, now he's just a millionaire. But 99% of his wealth he lost. However, for about 40 years, when he was the billionaire, he supported so much. And so many yeshivot, schools, synagogues were built because of him. And there is a famous rabbi, Rabbi Israel Tauber. He used to be a multimillionaire himself, and then he lost a large majority of his money. And he says that along with me, many of my friends lost money. And they were all crying, they were all depressed. They couldn't continue living. And they asked me, why are you so happy? You lost so much money just like we did. And he said, when Hashem gave me the money, I used it well. I know that I did my best with the money. I gave so much charity. I opened so many yeshivot, kolelim. Now that Hashem decided that it's time for me to be on a different level, fine. I'm happy that when I was given the opportunity, I used it well. And they regret. They say we had opportunity to do so much with our money and we lost it. We didn't give it when we had it. And now we want to give it, but it's too late. We don't have it. So that's very true. We don't know how long we're going to live. We don't know how long we're going to live with this income and not less. We don't know what Hashem's plans are. But what we do know is that whenever Hashem sends us somebody who asks for help, that's a sign that that's what we need to do. And so, Hashem, in 10 years, I'll be able to open 10 new yeshivas. But Hashem says, that's not what I want. I want you to open one yeshiva now.
What if when you're walking on the street, sometimes there's like a woman who just approaches you? So I try to get, but sometimes I don't have anything. And then once someone asked me, oh, can you buy me something? And I was like rushing to get somewhere.
Yeah.
So, do I have to go out of the way to buy them something?
So now let's go into this topic of who gets the money first, who gets larger part of it, who gets lesser part of it. Since we are considered managers of Hashem's account, when we give charity, we are supposed to be responsible managers and we have to distribute the money to those that are truly in need. And the better job we do, the greater our investment will be. If I can help somebody who needs it more and instead I choose somebody who doesn't really need it, then it's a bad investment. So the general rule is that most of your money should go to causes that you yourself know that they are good. Minority of your money should go to causes that you are less sure of. And if somebody approaches you on the street and you're not really sure if they're honest or Jewish, maybe they really have more money than you, and some people they are. I know some people that they have an addiction to get more and more money, and they really have a lot, and they have houses and they have
Mercedes, I'm telling you,
plenty.
Gypsies driving Mercedes outside, and then they come and they beg for money, and I'm like, you're not poor.
Right.
You're not even Jewish.
So if you don't know, then you can still give them, but what you give them is minimal. You can give them a quarter, you can give them $1, but more than that, you really have to do research and find out if they are really in need and if they're not lying. So if somebody is asking you for food, then usually you take it more seriously. And you can offer them, I can buy you some bread, I can buy you a bagel, If they say, no, no, just give me money, I'll buy for myself,
Yeah, no.
then you have to be cautious.
Yeah.
But again, our Chachamim say that the fact that there are swindlers is a good thing for us, because we can come to Hashem and we can say, the reason why I didn't give sometimes is because I wasn't sure if they're honest. But imagine if everybody was honest, then you would have to give all the time.
I have a question.
So now, before you ask the question, just let me say a few more rules on who gets the first priority. The closer the person to you, the greater is your responsibility towards them. So if it's your own parents or your own children or your own siblings that are in need, you have to give them first. If it's your relatives, then they come next. If it's people from your neighborhood, they are next. People from your city, maybe another neighborhood, but from your city, come next. And then people from your country come next. And then people from other countries, which means, and that makes sense, Hashem put you in a certain place in the world and surrounded you by certain people that need to interact with you. And depending on the interaction, you see what Hashem wants from you. If the person who is in need is closer to you in relationship or in proximity, that is a sign that you are more responsible for him. Since you are closer to him by blood or by space, you have to take greater care of him. If you have more resources, or you divide your resources between them, you can give smaller portion to people in other countries. Now, among other countries, if it's people from Israel, they take precedence as opposed to people from other countries besides the United States. Now,
The States will be prior to Israel because we live here.
yes, because again, it's more your responsibility. But again, you have to take things in perspective. If you have a poor person in the United States and a poor person in Israel, most of the time the poor person in Israel is much more poor than the poor person in the United States. Here there are many government programs that no matter how poor you are, you'll have plenty of food and you'll have whatever basic needs you have, even the shelter and the food and the phone and health insurance. Whereas in Israel, many people really don't have what to eat. And therefore, what we said is everything being equal. If you have people that are in a similar need, then the one that is closer to you takes precedence. But if one is suffering much more, then he takes precedence even over someone who is closer to you. Now, in circumstances, who gets first? What is considered the higher level of charity? So we say, of course, poor people come first. But if you have poor people who are learning Torah, they come first. If you have poor people who are observant as opposed to poor people who are not, of course, poor people who are observant come first. Therefore, if you know somebody who is learning Torah and they're poor, they are the first priority. So it goes Torah learning, whether it is an institution like yeshiva, organization like Emet, or a private individual like a kollel person, that comes first. Then come poor people. Then come people who need to pay for medical expenses. And then come all the other people who are in need. And by the way, not only somebody who is extremely poor and doesn't have what to eat is considered poor. Anybody who is struggling is considered poor, which means even a businessman who is rich, but right now he is struggling because he's trying to save his business, or he's trying to save the deal that he invested in, and he doesn't want to lose a lot of money, and because of that he needs a loan or he needs some help temporarily. He is considered somebody who deserves to be helped. And one more rule is that there are different levels of giving. Number one is to, instead of giving charity, to give a person a loan. Because when you give a loan, it's not as embarrassing as receiving charity. When you receive a loan, you feel like you are an investor, you're a businessman who is taking a loan, he's investing, and through that he's going to become rich. Which means that if you know somebody who is struggling and you can help them by giving them money to invest in a business, even though you're going to get your money back, but in the meantime, those months or years that you cannot use your money, that's considered the greatest kind of charity, because you help somebody without embarrassing them. Similarly, if you give a person a job, work, or business, you find him clients or you become their client, that is also the highest level of charity, because you're giving them parnasa, livelihood, without embarrassing them. And therefore, let's say you have a Jewish business that's struggling. Even though they're charging more for their services, it's still proper to give the business to them. Because by doing that, not only you are getting for yourself the service that you want, but you're also doing charity. And sometimes you can even subtract it from your maaser. Let's say you have the same thing online for $100, and you go to a Jewish business and it's $150. And you say, you know what? I'm going to give them the business because I know he's struggling. I know he told me he it's hard for him to pay tuition. I'm going to go and I'm going to give him extra $50. And I'm going to take this $50 from maaser because I really could have spent only $100 online. And it's as if I'm buying it online, I'm giving him tzedakah. But if I would come to his store and say, here, I bought something on Amazon and here's $50 tzedakah, he's going to be embarrassed. If instead I come to his store and I buy the object from him, he's going to feel good. Without embarrassment, he's supported.
That's only if you know he's struggling. It just doesn't apply just for a Jewish.
Now, if you feel that these people are not struggling, they are wealthy, why should I support them? Still, there's a mitzvah. However, that's more limited. If you know they're struggling, you for sure have to help them, and if you're doing it on purpose, knowingly, you can subtract it from your maaser. If you don't know if they're struggling, or you know they're successful business, it's still a mitzvah to support a Jewish business than a non-Jewish business. However, here there's a limit. The price can only be a little bit higher. If it's much higher, you don't have to go shop at a Jewish store. And if you decide to still do it, you have to know if they're struggling or not. If they're struggling, you can subtract it from your maaser. If not, not.
And also for the loan one, so if you give a loan as your maaser and then you get it back, then you have to again give maaser from that loan?
No. Your own money you give as a loan, you already gave maaser on that money. You already earned it. You separated maaser. No, now you have this clean money. You give it as a loan. Now, it's possible to take your own maaser money and instead of giving it as charity, to use that maaser money to create a fund. Let's say you have $10,000. You can either distribute it as charity, or you can set it aside and make a special account as your loan account. And whoever needs a loan, $1,000, $5,000, $10,000, you give it from that account. When they give it back, you put it back, but you know that this is not my money. This is maaser money. And there are Jewish organizations that's called gamach, where you put your own money there, like a savings account, and they use that money to give loans to people. And then whenever you need the money, you take it back. But in the meantime, every time they use your money to give out loans, you get a great mitzvah, the highest charity possible. Yes?
Okay, let's say you borrow the money, but then you burnt it, so you're not giving it back. So then what happens to this Maaser loan thing?
You're saying that if you give the money to somebody
And they don't give it back to you.
and they lost it,
They lost it, they went
so
bankrupt.
yeah, so here beforehand you have to make certain conditions. Do you want the money back or not? If you want the money back, then you have to ask for a guarantor.
But then it's not really Maaser.
Why not? It's
Because
maaser
is
because
charity.
you're helping the person with the loan, interest free. They use it to grow their business.
Didn't you say to use
And-
clean money?
Huh?
Didn't you say to use clean money for
This is a
loans?
separate option.
Um,
Is it an
S-
option you put
yes.
on a loan?
Separate, you have two options. Either you take your regular money and you give it to people as a loan. This way you don't lose it, you get it back. Another way is use your maaser money to create a loan fund. And either you get a guarantor and you insist that money should be paid back, or ahead of time you say, you know what, I trust this person, I know they're honest. If they cannot pay me back, it means that for sure they tried their best and they couldn't, and I forgive them. And in such a way, since the money to begin with was maaser, you can just forgive it and let it be maaser as charity. And if it was your own money, then in the future you can subtract it as maaser. Which means if you gave someone a loan and they couldn't pay you back, then you can subtract it as maaser in the future.
Okay, also sometimes they make donation online, right? Like Tesla.com, whatever.
Yeah.
So then they put you on this repetitive email list, even though you don't sign up for it. So every time you get it, you're obligated then to donate, no?
Whenever you get requests, if you can afford it and it fits within the priority list, you have to do it.
Everything's in the priority there.
However, if you have limited resources and you divide your money in such a way that the higher priorities take precedence and you already committed, and so you run out of your maaser funds and you cannot afford to give more from your own money, then you don't have to answer those requests. Some people have policy that they don't just say no, and they send something. It doesn't have to be a lot. It could be $5, $10, but at least something they send. Now, we mentioned just the highest level of charity, and that is either giving a loan or giving a job. This, you do it in an honorable way. There are lower levels. The second level is you give charity, but you don't know who is getting it, and the recipient doesn't know who is giving it. Which means, let's say they go to an organization, and the organization gives money to the poor people. They don't know who donated the money to the organization. And whoever donated, they don't know who is getting it. It's all done confidentially. So this way they're not embarrassed. And at the same time, you don't know who got it, and you're doing it lishma, you're doing it for the best reason, not because I want to next time see that person and say, I supported you. Even though if they don't know it, but I feel good knowing who I supported. So it gives me pleasure. Since I'm getting pleasure from giving, that already takes away from the reward. The next level is, or next two levels is either if the giver or the recipient knows about it, one of them. Let's say the giver knows, but the recipient doesn't know. So this way the recipient is not embarrassed. Or the other way, the recipient knows, but the giver doesn't know. And again, the recipient is embarrassed less because he knows who gave him, but he knows that the giver doesn't know that the money came to him. And the next level is to give money to the poor person while you're knowing who you're giving to, and he knows who he's getting to, but you're giving the money to him before he asks you. You note that somebody is struggling, and you go to him and you say, I want to help you. I have extra money, or someone gave me, I have this to distribute. Here, I would like you to have it. This is the next level. The lower level is if the poor person asks you for the money, and you give it to him. The next level is the poor person asks you for the money and you give it to him, but you cannot give him the full amount, you give him only partial amount. And the lowest level is he asks you, you give him partial amount and you do it with a heavy heart.
Like you don't want to give.
You don't want to give, you feel you don't want to be embarrassed, or you feel he's forcing it out of you. You give it to him and you really don't want. So that's the lowest level. It still counts as charity. It's still a mitzvah, but that's the lowest level.
I have a question, Rabbi. What about the non-Jews?
So what about non-Jews? We still are accustomed to give to non-Jews, and we do that for the purpose of creating peace in the world.
So what about?
If we would only give to Jews and not non-Jews, that would create bad feelings. And therefore, we are allowed to support non-Jews, but of course, in the priority list, it's not the highest priority, and we give them, but
Can you
not large amounts.
give Maaser to non-Jews too?
You can give your Maaser, but again, in your priorities, your family, your community come first.
Right, so like my sister had a coworker, nobody in our family needs. She didn't really know about the chesed funds. She had her coworker, her house burned down or something. She gave her like $500.
Right.
She's like, does that count? And I'm like,
Of course, yes. Whenever you do chesed, counts. And by the way, one of the reasons we do chesed, maaser, tzedakah, is not only to help the poor, but also to change ourselves. Right? It says, more does the rich do for the poor than the poor does for the rich. Right? So every time we give, we become better people. We become givers. And therefore, we have a rule that if you can give $100 to one person or $1 to 100 people, you should rather give $1 to 100 people, because the act of kindness times 100 is going to do more for you than a big act of kindness once. So even giving a non-Jew or giving a homeless person on the street, you don't have to give a lot, a quarter, $1, but every time you do it, you become a better person. Yes? Yes.
What if a person is in disguise and I'm Jew in disguise?
If he's pretending, yes. So if you know that if you know that somebody is lying, then you don't have to give them. You don't have to give them, unless you know for sure that they're poor. Let's say a person knows that unless he pretends he's someone he's not going to get any money, and he really is poor. So you give him because he really is suffering. But if you don't know and you know they're lying, you assume that it's they don't need it. Yes.
So you work for yourself, right? Then, according to Emunah, you need to basically believe Hashem is going to always provide. So you shouldn't think of retirement at all, and putting aside for savings.
It's not wrong to be responsible and to save enough for your survival. But how much you save is a different story. For example, depending on your level, there were tzaddikim that would try to use up all their money that same day. Because today Hashem gave me, tomorrow He's going to give me again. I don't have to save for future. But if you're worried, you can save. A good amount is to save enough money so that you can live off of it for 1 year. Which means if something happens, the business doesn't go, or a person loses a job, or whatever else, I have enough money to support my family for a year, and during that year, I'll find other means of supporting myself.
Yeah, but now we're young, we're able to do that. You don't know how you're going to be when you're, 70, 60, what ailments will have, will be functional or not. So how do you look
Right,
towards
so
that?
you look you look practically at it. You say, Baruch Hashem, I have a few children. Baruch Hashem, I have a house. I have this and that. In case of need, I'll sell my house. In case of need, my children will help me. It's not going to be the end of the world. You don't need to have the house, have investment, have enough money for all your children for college, have enough for the retirement, and for rainy day as well. One can solve all of it. You don't have to worry about your children's college. If you have an investment or a house, that's already enough of a protection for the rainy day. And you can already live peacefully ever after. And let me leave you with one more story, and that is a sad story. There was once a man. He met a friend and he said, there are two people in my life I cannot forgive. I cannot forgive the Rav of Kovna, the city in Europe, and the Panevėžio Rav. So what happened? What did they do to you that you cannot forgive them? He said, they used to come to me and they used to ask me for tzedakah. They used to beg me. They used to always try to inspire me. And I gave them. Every time they came, I gave them. But I'm upset at them. Why didn't they force me to give all my money to tzedakah?
Really?
Why? He said, because the communists came and they took everything. And they sent me to Siberia because I was rich. And if they would take my money, these two rabbis, then I wouldn't have to suffer. And I wouldn't have to feel bad that I worked all my life. And my parents worked all their life. And my grandparents worked all their life to save this money that I had now. And it all went to communists. He says, now I feel so terrible that for so many generations we worked for Stalin. And this is a story that many of us can relate to, because our grandparents and great-grandparents, for the last how many centuries, they were collecting money until the revolution came, the communists came and took everything away. And because of that saving, they sacrificed Torah learning, they sacrificed mitzvah observance. Often they decided not to have a child, and all for nothing. And even worse than nothing, they supported their own enemies. Because of their money, they were punished. Many of them were killed and exiled. So, if you have opportunity to invest in your spirituality, in your children, or in your career, in your houses, in your business, make the smart choice, because your children will always stay with you. Your spirituality will always stay with you. However, your money, your houses, your cars, nobody can guarantee. And history repeats itself. And we don't want to be victims of the same thing that happened to Jews in Spain, Jews in Germany, Jews in Russia, and Chas v'sholom, it shouldn't happen to Jews in America. So, Be'ezat Hashem, we should all live long with our families and have plenty of parnasah to support ourselves and others. And keep in mind that we are managers of God's account, and we should approach money with this view, and this will give us serenity. We don't have to worry about where my money is going to come from. We don't have to grab and collect, save. We can share, we can help, and Be'ezat Hashem will enjoy our money in this world and in the world to come. Shavua Tov. All the best.